Well, howdy all, grab yourself a beer, it's time for some Path of Exile discussion. So as part of my 3.17 League Start preparation, I've been doing a bit of brainstorming of builds that might have gotten a lot better with the patch, or at least with what we know about the patch so far. And this is not going to be a complete build. This is not something that you can take and start playing straight away. This is instead the skeleton around which a build might end up being built, and then at that point we'll be able to ascertain whether it's been a success, i.e. has good numbers in Path of Building and plays well in game, or whether it's just one of those things that ends up on the pile of discarded ideas. But for the moment, it's something to use as a bit of a discussion starting point. So this is the Fireball alternate ailment critical hit Deadeye idea that I had. I do think that this is something that could conceivably be league started. It has one unique item that is in-game only, and that is kind of mandatory for the build to really fall together. You're probably going to want it by the time you start pushing tier 12, 13 maps. However, it is 100% drop rate from fairly rare content, but not something that is particularly hard to get your hands on. It's one of those items where the base item is easy to get, but the well-rolled versions are very hard. So, a quick disclaimer about patch notes. No plan survives first contact with the enemy, and no build survives first contact with scary patch notes. We've had the balance manifesto, this is looking good at the moment, but there's always the potential that something in the patch notes crangle it. So we don't expect nerfs now, there's no guarantee that there'll be none, and plus some items might unexpectedly get made harder to source as well. This has happened in the past where people have planned around a particular item and then suddenly it's had a rarity tier increase, or one of the mechanics by which people had got it in the past disappears. So if you want something proven, come back when the full patch notes land. And this is also a brainstorm, not a full build. So a quick recap of terminology. This is a critical build. That means that it will scale critical strike chance and critical strike multiplier, and that these stats will be a big part of its damage. It's a hit build. So Fireball can deal damage with Ignite or with the initial impact of the spell. We are entirely focused on the latter. We are sacrificing all capability to inflict Ignites in order to do more damage with that initial hit. This is an alternate ailments build. So these aren't available until high level, but this build's endgame plans revolve around the special ailments of Brittle, Sap, and Scorch, in place of the usual elemental ailments of Chill, Freeze, Ignite, and Shock. These will be acquired through the use of the unique amulet Leadership's Price, and boss killing without this amulet will be pretty rough, and if you are playing this in solo self-found, which I'm not really sure I'd recommend, but if you were to play this in solo self-found, you'd probably want to lock in a copy of Leadership's Price before you start even thinking of leveling this build. And this is a Deadeye. That's the Ascendancy, +2 projectiles and chain can't be beat, especially with some of the synergies we'll get to with pinpoint support. You'll also be very squishy as a Deadeye, and so ultimately, like almost all Deadeyes, this build is for softcore play. So, goodness gracious, yeet balls of fire. Fireball now hits quite a bit harder, and here's the relevant patch notes. Basically, it's getting a 50%-ish buff to hit damage, but it's actually only mildly better for Ignite. And having played Fireball Ignite in 3.16, I feel that this is just going from C tier to C plus tier damage. And 28% less Ignite global damage change hurts here, and these two changes combined wind up as a net 8% buff. So you're multiplied by 0.72 by the nerfs to overall Ignite, you multiply by 1.5 by the buffs to Fireball, and the overall effect of that is times 1.08. However, hit-based Fireball gets the whole 50% with none of the 28% nerf. Now, hit-based Fireball has access to some great tools though, like Brittle to almost always crit and Scorch to debuff resistances. We're going to take advantage of those. We'll get them through the endgame unique Leadership's Price, which should be available for a price at League Start plus 96 hours, and should be available much more widely, as long as you're okay with a poorly rolled one, which you will be, by about 7 to 12 days into the league. This is the sort of item that craters in price over time. So Leadership's Price, a quick recap, this is a poorly rolled one, this is a well-rolled one. It drops exclusively from the Twins, which is the capstone encounter from Heist, and it's always corrupt. This means it is immune to both the effects of Divine Orbs and Blessed Orbs. Divine Orbs being more important here because it has a 3 axes of scaling for the maximum resist stats on it. An item with poor rolls was available towards the end of 3.16 for about 30C, plus a couple of exalts for your Tainted Oil. Great rolls that summed to 6% or more were about 10x, and perfect rolls were 50x or more. However, these prices are end of a league based. Start at 317, who knows where they'll be. Brittle Conflux is one of the most powerful things in the game, and that's because Brittle is overpowered, really overpowered. Scorching Conflux is great too, and Sapping Conflux is a bonus. This item is well worth all of the hoops you need to jump through in order to use it, which usually entails sacrificing one of your jewel slots to use a conversion jewel. So something like I think it's called Fluid Motion is one of the jewels, or Fertile Mind, the jewels that convert one stat into another and give a chunk of boost to that stat as well. We're going to be using Pinpoint Support. This is slightly worse than GMP on Ignite builds, but is stellar on hit-based Fireball. Pinpoint gives you damage projection when you most need it, and sacrifices that for damage when that's what you need. So you can think of it as a slightly worse GMP that gem swaps itself for a damage support when needed. So when you're in greater multiple projectiles mode, aka intensity equals 0, you get +3 projectiles and 15% less damage. 15% less is based upon support gem level 21. So while you're using level 19, it'll be 16% less damage, not that much different. Single target mode, you have +0 projectiles, i.e. no change to projectiles, and 36% more damage. Notice how this has basically swapped itself over. In order to build up to single target mode, you will need to unleash a few copies of the spell while standing still. The Mastery Enhanced Single Target, and this is something that's an optional endgame option only, you have -1 projectiles and 53% more damage. So 53% more damage is pretty stellar for a single support gem, but it does come at a genuine drawback. Note that this can reduce your projectile count to 0, which is kind of a bad thing, but we are a Deadeye, so we will have the +2 projectiles node. +2 projectiles chain is definitely in this, it would definitely be in this Ascendancy plan. Plus you take Tailwind, the marks have more effect, is your 4th node. So a couple of quick thoughts on how you might gear this. You would start with Leveling Garbage, 4-link with bad stats. Then you could upgrade to anything in this tier. 5-link Essence Rare, which would be cheap. 5-link Unique from Heist or similar. Not necessarily a great Unique, not necessarily the one you want. A good example of this would be something like an Ambush Charge. They drop 5-links somewhat frequently, and as a result, that'd be your next step. Or you could go to a Corrupt 6-link, or you could go to a Tabula Rasa. Your next sort of tier of upgrades would be a Dapper Prodigy sourced Essence 6-link Rare, a 6-link Unique that might have dropped in Heist, Shadow Stitch, which is probably a little bit more expensive than the rest of this, or a Skin of the Loyal or Skin of the Lords with the exact right colors you want. Your next sort of tier of upgrades would be a 30% Aura Effect Rare Chest. So this is Elevated Redeemer, possibly on a Sacrificial Garb base, other mods to be determined. 6-link Brass Dome as a defensive powerhouse is another option, well-rolled Shadow Stitch, or a premium Skin of the Loyal with excellent corruptions, or a premium Skin of the Lords with an excellent Keystone. Then we have our sort of upper tier, which includes such things as 30% Aura Effect Grasping Mail with the 100% Chaeola Local Defenses mod, an Elder Brass Dome, assuming that you've got access to Blasphemer's Grasp and you're using that, or a Double Corrupted Really Good Rare. And if you want a sense of what an extraordinarily uber chest would look like, this is a real chest that someone is trading for 75 exalts in the Scourge League. The Offerings Effect mod is really strong, and it's not something we want. We would want something else in place of that suffix, but there'd be plenty of other options. This provides a solid chunk of life. Extra Curse is always powerful for utility. And also, you're getting 30% increase of effective non-curse auras from your skills. Non-curse aura effect is the best defensive stat in the game right now. It's better than life. It's better than anything else. It's going to remain that way as long as Determination and Grace and Defiance banner remain as powerful as they are. Then you got Spell Crit, which is great. It's like starting a fight with a small brittle on the enemy. And you've got 10% of maximum life as extra maximum energy shield. So this is an example of a truly great chest. And you could craft something like this, possibly with a different suffix here, and get something that's really good out of it. Hearing thoughts from a weapon perspective, this would probably be one-handed weapon and shield. Now, I made this presentation before the Annihilating Light, I think it's called, the new caster staff was revealed. So you should definitely consider the Annihilating Light. We don't know how rare that's going to be. I feel it might be a very, very rare, very expensive item early on, but we'll find out on that front. You start with Leveling Garbage. A good example here might be Tier 2 flat damage to spells, which is available from item level 62, and then Benchcraft to spell damage. From there, you could either go to a Deafening Anguish craft with bench spell damage, a Glyphic weapon, Glyphic being tier 2 spell damage percent, and bench flat fighter spells. You could go to a Cerberus Limb, which is a very defensive choice, or you could go to a Deafening Misery craft, which is cast speed from memory, and just spam Deafening Miseries until you get a reasonable tier of flat fire to spells or spell damage, and then bench craft the other one. So then you could go Deafening Misery with good prefixes as an upgrade there, a Runic weapon with one other good prefixes and okay suffixes, or a +1 to fire and +1 to all spells with good suffixes. Next upgrade would be +1 to fire, +1 to spells, and high tier flat fire, as well as great suffixes. And then your top tier here in this sort of chain of rares would be a Squire setup. So you'd use a Squire in your offhand and a Shaper weapon with 40% more damage, and pseudo-links on it would be the other sort of option that you'd have here. So that's some sort of outline as to how you might gear for the weapon perspective. From the weapon perspective, you could also consider things like Martyr of Innocence or the new staff. So gearing thoughts for the shield. So you could have Leveling Garbage, which with life and resist. Then you could upgrade, well, you could go to all in on damage and use a second weapon or a Searing Touch, upgrade the Searing Touch to a Martyr of Innocence, and upgrade Martyr of Innocence to a +5 fire spell staff, or with Blasphemer's Grasp only, an Elder Martyr of Innocence, Elder influenced. The reason we're talking about Blasphemer's Grasp is not because of the damage multiplier that it gives, because that won't apply to us, we're not igniting. It's because it makes our Brittles more effective, it makes our Scorches more effective, and that's a damage multiplier. You go halfway all in on damage and use a pure energy shield that is just rolled for damage. So here you could have +1 fire skills on it, and any energy shield it has as a bonus. Then you could also have that as an upgrade from that. You could also have that same mod, but also have it with a Deafening Scorn Essence craft or a Hysteria Essence for a bit more damage, or Glyphic, one of these sorts of mods to give even more damage on it. And then you could just simply get a better version of the same thing, or you could have Shaper life gain on block with it. Next, you could have a life and spell suppression dexterity shield, and then you could upgrade that to also have Shaper life gain on block or Redeemer ailment effect, or you could have both of those. Now, if you're using Cerberus Limb, which is the drop from Ahototli the Blind, one of the Delve bosses, this has a fair chunk of spell damage and is the shield that has, if you've got energy shield on your shield, you get a chunk of armor. If you've got armor on your shield, you get a chunk of evasion rating. And if you've got evasion rating on your shield, you get a chunk of bonus energy shield. I might have those around the wrong way. Basically, though, you get something for any of them. You could use a pure armor shield rolled with dense fossils, very similar to the sorts of shields that were popular in conjunction with Shield Crush and or Spectral Shield Throw. And if it's less than 30 block when you finish it, then just sell it and recraft another one, because you really want 30% 30% attack block with Cerberus Limb. That's because if your shield provides 30% attack block, Cerberus Limb will give you Life Leech on your hits, and you will be hitting hard with this build. You could then upgrade that further to 2000 plus armor, Shaper life gain on block, and 30% or more block, and that would be the fantastic pair for Cerberus Limb. Gearing thoughts for gloves, helm, and boots. So firstly, you want to decide, am I using Blasphemer's Grasp or not? If you're using Blasphemer's Grasp, then you will want to have Elder items in a lot of other slots. Really, though, want to work this out a bit later if the build looks like it's going well. You want to start out with Spell Suppression, Life Resist gear, and just keep replacing it with better stuff. Obviously, you need move speed. It's mandatory on Influence boots. I think you want at least 25%, and you want 35% or a veiled 30 on non-influence boots from early on. Obviously, 30 flat on a budget is fine. And you want to seriously consider both the upsides and the downsides of Influence Pierce boots. So there is an Influence craft that allows your projectiles to pierce once, twice, or 5 times, depending on which tier you've got, and they ruin your ability to chain. So this doesn't necessarily play all that well with the Deadeye, but it sort of also does, because you can pierce, if you fire a projectile into a pack, if it pierces once, then chains, that's a great setup. If it pierces 5 times, it might never get the chain, and so that means it's going to lose some of your ability to go around corners. Long story short, it's probably actually better to use a non-elevated version of this craft on this build. You probably want to use it once or twice piercing, and not 5 times. So, Yeah, that's Blasphemous Grasp we were discussing before. So until you get Leadership's Price, what do you do? One thought that I had is maybe trying out Replica Malachi's Artifice with Stormbrand and a fair chunk of cold damage to spells. So Stormbrand just crits frequently. Your crits are going to be tiny, but eventually you will inflict brittle with one of these crits. Note that only critical strikes inflict brittle and get things started, and that's why Replica Malachi's Artifice can be a little bit dubious at times. You're going to need a fair bit of additional crit from somewhere. There's also the option of Nadir Mode, which does a bunch of critical strike for you, give you a lot. It also slows down your acquisition of intensity, which means you need to stand still for much longer in order to gain your intensity while you're spamming fireballs. So it's not something that is pure upside. This is a 50% drop rate from the unique heist contract, Breaking the Unbreakable. Eye of Winter may be superior to the Stormbrand setup. You'd have to play with both and see which one works out better. Other options you could consider, Merlin's Fallacy with the as something you would add along with the Replica Malachi's Artifice setup if the Replica Malachi's Artifice setup feels good. I'm not sure it will. I'm really unsure. Else you can just use a Life Resist Amulet, something you can live without. For mana reservations, you would want to use Determination, Grace, Defiance Banner. This package is mandatory at the moment because these reservations are all so powerful. Grace you can skip, but Determination and Defiance Banner are mandatory. However, Grace we are going to be taking for certain on this build because it empowers Ghost Shrouds even with just a little bit of energy shield. Grace and Ghost Shrouds also play really well together with Replica Soul Tether. That's the unique belt that grants you Corrupted Soul. That belt can be expensive early in a league, but you do want to keep it in mind because it will give you about 1,000 energy shield on most builds, and that is enough to get you started with having meaningful Ghost Shrouds. That alongside Grace. Grace means that every time you take a hit, you will recover several hundred energy shield. Although that is capped at 3 times per 6 seconds. After that, Zealotry versus Anger is a numbers game if you've got more capacity to reserve your mana. And so use neither of them until you can afford them. Use whichever one turns out to be better. I suspect that'll be Zealotry, but I'm not sure. And then if you reach a point where you can use both, obviously use both. Clarity might be needed. We've got to test this. You might even want to use Vile Clarity as well. Fireball can be a really mana-intensive skill, especially when spamming it. And Skitterbots are another option because we cannot shock, but the little skater boys can. Stuff that needs to be done in a path of building analysis at a later stage before you even consider rolling this as a build. So this has all been brainstorming so far. This is the stuff that needs to happen before you actually start the character. Firstly, what are your other supports? Is increased critical damage worth it? Or do you want to use something else entirely? Maybe you want to use the gloves that set your critical multiplier to 300% to start with. All this is up in the air, it needs to be tested. What about other supports in general? Very important note, do not use Elemental Focus because that turns off your ability to inflict Brittle, and that is essentially going to cripple your ability to inflict critical hits on enemies, which is going to cripple your damage. Which wins? +1 to gem level or +1 to... Tier 1 flat fire damage to spells. Tier 1 flat fire damage to spells is easier to roll, at least at the moment. We don't know that'll be the case in 3.17, but for the moment it is the way to go. What sort of rings do you want? Do you want opal rings? Do you want something else? Just how much damage does Alira add by helping you solve your resists and mana and therefore freeing up investment into resists and mana that you might have made otherwise? Are charges worth it? Maybe just overcharged. Maybe you want power charges. Maybe you want frenzy charges. Not really sure how you would go about doing that. And what sort of passive tree texture are we looking at? Anyways, that's my current thoughts at the moment. As I said, this is not a full build. This is a brainstorming session. But if you've got any comments or questions, definitely fire away below. Otherwise, may Varlorb have interesting results, and I will be going back to planning my Saboteur that is using a Lightning Trap.